and will be published on the council's website. So if anyone doesn't wish to be part of that, please don't be here. No, but just to be aware that that's going to be happening. So it's just one of the things we have to read out at the beginning. Moving on to item 2, apologies for absence.
Thank you. Yes, apologies received from Councillor Mason and from Councillor Peacock.
Any items of urgent business?
No items of urgent business.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
A member of the Royal College of Radiologists.
I was a member of the RCN and my sister's a GP in Tottenham. Anyone else got anything they just want to? Nope. Okay. Minutes. We've got pages 1 to 14 of the minutes. Is there anything from the minutes that people would either like to bring up because they think they haven't been recorded correctly, or they've got a query about anything in the minutes they'd like to bring to the committee's attention? No, I'm just going to mention a couple of things. So on one of the agenda items, I think it's, excuse me, the LGA, excuse me, the LGA commissioning strategic plan. They were going to bring back the commissioning strategic plan after that first review in 6 months. So I got it down as January 2024. So just to think whether we put that on the workforce agenda item for this evening. That was it from me. Okay, so just to let you know, the tracker that we've had, which has all the actions from the meeting, unfortunately, we haven't had any of them updated yet. So we're still waiting. I think we've got quite a number of actions here. So if we could get those action filled in, because we've got a blank tracker, which is unusual, because I have to say this panel is normally, and the officers are normally really good at filling all that in. So I'd be grateful if that could be done. That would be great. Thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item 7. So that's in the pack on page 15. We've got 2 parts to this. This is on Haringey suicide prevention update. We've got Dr. Chantal Fontana here to talk to us what's going on in Haringey, and very specifically around the council and public health involvement. And then we've got colleagues, and there are a number of colleagues here, which is excellent, come from a bit further afield. So Barnet, Enfield, Haringey Mental Health Trust. I've got the Whittington, I've got Mind as well. And we're looking and specifically asking them around suicide prevention in Haringey. But one of the questions that was brought up at the JOSC, which is the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, was what happens when people contact the crisis helpline when they are feeling suicidal, but don't have what's known as apparently a suicide plan, which is something that's very specifically going to say exactly how that's going to be carried out. And we weren't sure at the end of that JOSC meeting what the service support was for those clients at that point. So particularly it'd be really helpful if we could have any update on that as we come to that part in the presentation. But obviously it'd be really helpful to also hear about your suicide prevention strategies. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over straight to Chantal, straight to go in, and then I'm just going to ask who's going to be leading from. I've got Temi, are you?
I'll start with the mark, and then there'll be other contributors that come through.
So just very quickly, I'm just going to introduce myself. I should have done that at the beginning. Apologies. And I'm going to ask my panel to do that. And then as you speak, if you could then just introduce yourselves, that would be helpful rather than doing it at the beginning. I'm Councillor Pippa Connor. I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee, and I'm going to hand over to Helena.
Hi, I'm Helena Carnier, and I'm a co-optee on this committee.
Hi, I'm Sean O'Donovan. I'm a councillor for Tottenham Hale Ward.
Hi, I'm Karen, councillor for Woodside.
Kathy Brennan, councillor for Muswell Hill.
And Ali.
Hello, I am Ali Amasiali, co-op team member.
Excellent, thank you. So
Good evening, colleagues. I'm Dr. Chantal Patania. I'm a consultant in public health at Haringey Council and the lead for suicide prevention from the public health team. So obviously suicide is an important issue, particularly as globally it's a leading cause of death. Each suicide is very tragic, and we know that it can have a significant ripple effect on individuals, friends, families, and relatives, and the wider community. If we look at this first graph, which shows the trends in suicide rates from 2001 to 2021 in Haringey, we can see that generally there's been small fluctuations, but a gradual decline over the last 10 years. And from 2019 to 2021, the suicide rates were lower than London and England averages in Haringey. Next slide, please. When we compare, so this graph just shows the suicide rates across North Central London from 2019 to 2021. There were 50, the total suicide count from 2019 to 21 was 50. There were 22 suicides in 2019. In 2020, there were 15, and 2021, there were 13. And these are statistics that we receive from the Office for National Statistics, which have been confirmed by the coroner. Next slide, please. We also regularly look at data which we have received from Thrive London's real-time suicide surveillance. We first received data from January 2020, and we last looked at it on 15th of May 2023. So if you can just, sorry, click a bit. Yeah, that's great. So this shows the information that we have about Haringey suicides. As you can see, there are more males than females. Slightly more single people have died by suicide than married, and a small fraction of people were divorced. And if you look at the suicide by age group, the greatest numbers are those from 25 to 44 years of age. And the smaller graph there just shows this in terms of the population of Haringey overall, which is estimated to be around 264,200 people. So comparatively, the numbers of suicides are small but significant. In Haringey, we have a strong multi-agency suicide prevention group, which is funded by Public Health and the Integrated Care Board jointly and hosted by Mind in Haringey. It's chaired by Professor David Moss, who is actually a national expert in suicide and suicide prevention. So we're very fortunate. It's a really well established group and has a good range of partners from the ICB, Public Health, BEH, GPs, Haringey Council, and the VCS and police. So it's a really good group, and it helps to steer the suicide prevention strategy for Haringey. Every year we develop a new action plan, and within the scrutiny report you saw some of the actions which are part of, we didn't include everything, it'd be far too long. And currently we have a existing suicide strategy which runs from 2020 to 2023. We're now in the process of developing a new strategy for Haringey, which will run from 2023 to 2028. You may have seen that the England strategy, suicide strategy, was released a week ago. So we will obviously be working to make sure that we learn from that, and also our local needs, but make sure we're compliant with what the national strategy requires. Next slide, please. In 2020-21, we created a Great Mental Health Resources Hub, which contains a wealth of diverse resources to support people with their mental health and well-being. And it has direct links to the websites of partner agencies, both locally and nationally. And the web pages are regularly updated. This is to try and help residents be able to be aware of the different resources that we have in Haringey. We do promote it very regularly, and I believe our partner agencies do as well. There's information about lots of different things like bereavement, cost of living, gambling, men's mental health, workplace mental health. And there's also specific support for men. So information about men's sheds, James's Place, offering kind of free and immediate in-person therapy for men who are in suicidal crisis in a kind of warm and welcoming environment. So this is something that counsellors and partners could help by promoting. And we know that it has increasingly been used. We also, next slide, please. Haringey also has a safe haven crisis hub, which is specifically for people who are experiencing a crisis, feeling sad, low, and would like support. It's available 7 days a week between 5 to 9 p.m. and can benefit people who are having suicidal thoughts about self-harm, low mood, and feel that their mental health may be deteriorating. For people who would like to get support, but not necessarily in Haringey, we also have the Listening Place, which operates from sites in Shepherd's Bush, Mead Mews and Hunter Street, and will also support anyone who's over the age of 18 years. And we know that people from Haringey have visited the Listening Space in the past. Suicide is extremely complex and people act differently in different ways when they're struggling to cope. Next slide, please. This slide just shows a range of different kinds of urgent and other support which is available for Haringey residents. So Samaritans, Childline, Papyrus, Cooth, Good Thinking. And it just means that there's a breadth of different types of support. Good Thinking has culturally tailored resources which have been co-produced with communities across London. Cooth has now been established and in place in Haringey for several years and is being used particularly by children and young people from ethnic minority communities for a host of different reasons. So there is a range of support which is available. Next slide, please. The next slide also shows support that we have in Haringey. So Choices, Open Door, Mind in Haringey, Young Minds and CAMS. And these are specifically services which can support children and young people. Next slide, please. We know that suicide can have a devastating impact and can impact up to 135 people every time there's a suicide, friends, families, and communities. And the grief that's experienced can be particularly devastating because of the sudden and unexpected nature of the loss. So a few years ago, during the pandemic, we set up a core post-vention support after suicide service across North Central London. It's funded partly by the NHS and partly by directors of public health. And it supports people with individual support when they need it, peer-to-peer support, and also offers some outreach support. There have been groups for siblings, spouses, and relatives. Yeah, and group therapy, which has been found to be extremely beneficial for those who have been supported by the service. The service is now going to be provided by a different provider in October. So we will, as soon as comms becomes available about the new service, we'll start promoting that. But essentially, it's really designed to support people to help prevent long-term complex health complications, suicide contagions, and clusters, which we know are risks. Next slide, please. The Haringey because of the size of the number of suicides and the population size of Haringey, we've really tried to focus on prevention and early intervention as part of and really making sure that we're trying to signpost people to the appropriate support early to try and prevent issues escalating and it getting to a point of crisis. We know that community connection is really important. You'll be aware that we established the Great Mental Health Day last year for the first time as part of the Great Mental Health Programme, and this year it was even more successful. We had more than 42 events that were held across Haringey. Residents who attended said it was extremely positive, came at the right time. We've had wonderful feedback. It also, our day became a London-wide day and has been supported by lots of other boroughs now and the Mayor of London. And this year it was Thrive London's most successful campaign ever to date, which is just an astonishing achievement and just shows that it's not just Haringey that's benefited from this day, but also Londoners. There's an evaluation report which we've produced, which will be available on the Great Mental Health Resources Hub for anyone that wants to read it. But we'd like the day, and the Labour manifesto has got a commitment to host the day for the next few years. So we're hoping that next year will be even bigger and better. And we would like people to, you know, promote the activities and also the wellbeing services that we have in Haringey. Next slide, please. Recently, it was World Suicide Prevention Day, which provided an excellent opportunity to continue to promote Haringey's resources and also training packages to residents. So we did quite a lot, particularly internally within comms. David Moss also attended different events and was a speaker. And we did a lot of promotion. The main thing we're trying to promote specifically around suicide is the Zero Suicide Alliance training course, which is 20 minutes. It's free. It's a really good training offer, which is short, digestible, and we're not sure exactly how many people have undertaken the training, so it's very difficult to know, but we have been promoting it now for a couple of years. Mental health first aid training course is also offered by Mind in Haringey, and the Samaritan's Guide is on how to support someone you're worried about is also very, very good and a valuable source of information, as is the Samaritan's website, Papyrus's website, and Rethink's page as well. And we've also continued to promote our digital mental health offers, specifically Good Thinking for adults and Couth for children. Next slide, please. And on the Friday, the 28th of August, the government announced a £10 million fund to support suicide prevention activities, which can be delivered in England by VCS organisations from 2023 to 2025. The strategic objectives of the fund are to support basically a range of diverse and innovative activities that can prevent suicide both at a national and community level. And the slide here just shows some of the groups that they're particularly interested in supporting, but not exclusively. So, for example, interventions to support children and young people and men, people who have previously self-harmed, those who've been in contact with mental health services, and other groups. We know that Open Door and Mind in Haringey are likely to apply for this funding, and we're working with partners to see what kind of innovative initiatives we might be able to get established in Haringey if we're successful. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. It gives us an opportunity to scrutinise and ask questions now. I think we'll do that before we go on to our health colleagues, if that's okay, just because otherwise I think it's going to be too much information to hold and ask panel members. Before we start, very, very briefly, because I think we've spent quite a bit of time on the slides already, but I just wanted to just double check, or not double check, I just wanted to be really clear at the outset. Chantal, if you could explain to members around the public health offer within the council's remit, and obviously our colleagues sitting around the table, I mean, I'm sure they can speak for themselves, but I think just very briefly, just sort of put it in context, because obviously we're hearing different services, and a question that might come up in people's minds is, well, do these cross over? Do these overlap? How does this all work together? So if you just briefly put that into context.
So public health are funding the Haringey Suicide Prevention Group in collaboration with the ICB. It's a bit confusing because it's hosted by Mind in Haringey. They're the providers, and they work with David Moss to form this group, which is a multi-agency group with partners from all across Haringey, who have an interest in suicide prevention or are delivering a service. Every year we produce, and we have an overarching strategic plan, which we've developed within public health. And every year we develop a new action plan in collaboration with the group, but we kind of write it up, but we basically engage with the partners in the group and wider partners to develop an action plan, which we hope will help to reduce suicides and improve mental health in Haringey. Is that enough information?
That's fine. I'll ask health colleagues how they interact with that as well, and how it fits together as a joined up service.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to, okay, so I've got Helena. Has anyone got, so I've got Councillor Nkana and Councillor Brennan, and I'll come back. Okay.
Thank you. You might want to switch your. Thank you. Really interesting, and I know how it hits the middle age and young, but I was surprised to see how many were in the 65 plus group. So, you know, that was nearly the same as some of the other age groups. So I wondered whether you had anything to say about the reasons, or what support services are there any for that group of people? And the other question I've got, if I can just push it in there, is there anything that you know about any diversity groups? Is there a higher incidence perhaps in the Somali? I don't know. It would be interesting to know if that happens as well. But as I say, I was surprised about the 65 plus group. Thank you.
Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It was very interesting to read. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. The first one I think is pretty straightforward. Yeah, the data you presented was, I mean, shows that the work that you are putting is bearing fruit. You know, the numbers are going down, but you have only numbers till data till 21. I was wondering if you have any new data between 21 and 23. Okay.
There's an 18-month delay.
Sorry.
basically.
The other, just before I ask the next question, the follow-on is, it's really interesting to see that London average is below the entire country. And I'm just kind of slightly puzzled by that data. You know, maybe you can answer that. The next, I think, more important question I have is, there was a slide sent to us under OSC service prevention, suicide prevention service, and one heading was closing the gap between NHS talking therapies and secondary mental health services. So for me, it wasn't clear is, what is the gap? What are the gaps in your service? Is that a different discuss? Is that something you're going to address?
That's a different issue, and it was presented as a question we needed to address to the overview and scrutiny committee, but I'm happy to talk about more generally.
Okay, so maybe I'll keep that question for yourself then. Thank you so much. Yeah.
We deal with those questions first. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to hand over to Lynette for the over 65s, because that Haringey Wellbeing Network will definitely support people of all ages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can answer that. So yeah, in relation to the over 65s, we've actually known that they are still a risk group. Yeah, so when we looked at the figures over a 10-year period, which is delivered in mental health first aid, when we look at the subject of suicide, we've known that there's still a risk when you get to, you know, those golden years. At Mind in Haringey, we deliver in partner with Public Voice, Reach and Connect. So that is the main offer to those over 50 in the borough. All our community navigators are trained in mental health first aid as standard. 2 of them are housed or hosted by Mind in Haringey. So if there are any queries in relation to suicide, they can refer those over 65s into our Haringey Wellbeing Network. And once they're there, we do an assessment and see where the most appropriate place is. So what we try to do at Mind in Haringey is make sure any organisations that are working with that group come and do our training and we support them.
Sorry, I mean, that sounds like what you're doing for every other group, and yet there are all these specialised services for the young. You've got a lot actually up there, and there seems to be nothing targeted for men that are over 65. I mean, Reach and Connect is very stretched at the moment in what they're doing. So I just wonder whether there needs to be something specific. And I've not actually heard, maybe I'm not supposed to know, but why? Why are men over 65 wanting to kill themselves? Sorry.
No, that's a good question. And I think it's a lot to do with retirement. Maybe the plans for the later years didn't end up in the way that they thought, which is a bigger problem in this country. What you do when you get older, where are the services? I mean, this is a borough that up until we had Reach and Connect, there were no services for older people, didn't we? We lost our Age UK in the borough. So you make a really crucial point about how do we offer things specifically to those groups. I would say of Reach and Connect, they do, even though they're stretched, and believe me, I go to the meetings and hear how stretched they are, but they also deliver groups. So they've got reading groups, befriending groups, ways of bringing the older population together and then finding out what's going on. And I think the really good thing about Reach and Connect, if one of those issues came up, they would know exactly where to refer that person into. So they're well placed, but we could always do with more services.
I just wanted to highlight this point that within the Trust's older adults mental health service,
So if you've got a phone nearby or some emphasis electronic, or just try the other, yeah, perfect.
just within the Trust's older adults community mental health service, we are also expanding the voluntary sector offer across Haringey as part of our voluntary sector contract with Hestia. That's we're putting new roles into the older adult service as well. So there will be additional non-statutory care for vulnerable older adults at risk of suicide.
Yeah, so on the diversity point, we haven't got any information that says which different groups are more at risk of suicide. So I think we are, because of this relatively small numbers, there's no trends. So that's why we're trying a whole population, approach, making sure that everyone can access prevention and early intervention without discriminating. Also, there's so much intersectionality, ethnicity is categorized in different ways. Not everyone will give ethnic data either. So I think it skews the results if we were to rely on that. Even across London, I think it will screw. But we know that there are certain groups that are at higher risk. BAME communities are at higher risk.
Councillor Karen's questions.
So I'm not sure why the Haringey numbers are lower than the London average, or why London is lower than England. However, I think it's positive that it's lower than the England average.
I might be able to answer that a little bit. When we look at suicide across the country and we see areas of really high deprivation outside London, particularly in the northeast, where some of their industries have been decimated over the last 10 to 20 years, we see high rates of suicide. So if you go to Hull and Newcastle and places like that, you will see higher rates. Sometimes the rate will be 4 to 1. So 4 men to every 1 woman. When you go, the further north you go, the higher the rates are, and particularly around men. And we've known that for a long time. Now, that's something else about our country and the things that we think are more important outside of London. Yeah. So hopefully that helps.
Councillor Brennan. So Councillor Donovan, did you want to ask any questions?
I have a very, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to answer this question, actually. I was looking at the table. So you've got table 1. And so it's slightly segueing onto the violence against women and girls, where, as you know, domestic abuse causes some people to commit suicide. And you just mentioned DHRs should be completed from domestic homicides and suicides that result from domestic abuse. And I just wondered whether that's a casual use of the word should, or a more careful use of the word should, as in it's not currently done. That's the question, but I don't know whether you can answer that. I mean, do you understand what I mean? I mean, if these should be carried out but aren't carried out, one would usually say they should be carried out.
No, they are carried out.
I think that was a very good question, actually, and I think it just emphasises. I wasn't quite sure where this information then went and who monitored what the outcomes were from gathering this information. Was this to go to produce different strengths and different types of services, or was this specifically just around, not just, but for the person that was coming to a service and saying that they needed specific help? Yeah, so on the find it now, I had it written down on my, I think it's around some of the forms that needed to be filled out. Domestic abuse, the -RIC is the sector-wide risk assessment tool. I wasn't quite sure, so that's on page 20 or 6 of 9 on the slides. I wasn't quite sure where this information went once it was gathered. So I understood that it was all the different services were going to be using that assessment tool, but I wasn't sure if that assessment tool was specifically, well, obviously it's for the benefit of the person that they're asking the questions to, but was that information then going on anywhere else? Was that information data being gathered in order maybe to specifically pick up areas where there might not be the same support that we think there is?
So I think it's being used internally at the moment to support the clients. That's the primary use. I think for some services, we may get the information as part of our monitoring services, you know, the ones we've commissioned, but it won't be uniform across all of them. However, we are recommissioning all of our WARG services over the next year. So it is something that we will try and improve consistency on and get better information.
And I just wanted to come in and flag that since Chantel's mentioned the commissioning, that there will be a process of engagement, and we have some good plans to engage councillors. So I think councillors from this committee and across from the whole council have the opportunity to engage in that process, but also be in the room, in the space with other professionals and people with experience of working with those who've experienced domestic violence. So we'll be able to inform and be part of that process as well. So watch this space on that one.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Brennan. So I'm just going to ask Councillor Donovan and Councillor Poker if they've got any questions, and Ali, if you've got a question.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for giving us your presentation, so the officer could circulate it for the meeting. That was very useful, and of course it's positive to see the relatively low numbers of reported suicides in Haringey and in other parts of London, and that may be a consequence of the fact that over the years we've built up in London and Haringey in particular a range of social infrastructure where people can meet, not necessarily just to seek help about their health and suicide thoughts, but meet more in general and then feel more confident to ask for help. And maybe in the post-industrial places that you're talking about don't have that sort of infrastructure. We could always do with more infrastructure here, but obviously in other parts of the country they may also want to. In terms of the £10 million for voluntary sector organisations. Obviously, that's welcome, although it's £10 million throughout the country is a relatively small amount of money. It'd be interesting to find out how local organisations will be bidding for that and working together to bid rather than competitive bidding in local areas. There was also the NHS long-term plan, which I think was a few years ago, and there was £57 million allocated to suicide prevention and bereavement. That was in, I think it was termed waves. The first wave would go to places where there was a higher suicide rate, and then the next waves of funding would go to other ones. And as the time went on, the amount of money got less and less. I think there's also concern whether or not that will be continued next year. And is the difficulty in Haringey is that we are because of social infrastructure, because of community organisations, the suicide reported rate in Haringey is getting less, but because of that, we may well be getting less funding from the government. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. So I did wonder about this as well. Our rates are lower than other areas. However, they're also looking at innovation. So if we can be innovative, then I think we have a chance of getting funding, but we won't be a priority based on our suicide rate.
One more question that I forgot to ask, which was, are the rates underreported? I know from an Irish Catholic background in Ireland, but over here, there was some pressure on family GPs not to record the cause of death as suicide. That may well be true in other religious, other religious groups or for other cultural reasons, that suicide is unreported, reported less.
Yeah, you're right. We do think it is underreported in different groups for religious reasons, cultural reasons, other reasons, family stigma.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Opoku, and then.
Thank you. I don't have a particular question to ask, just apologies for lateness, but I think the report is quite thorough. It shows work in different groups and different, even like construction workers. I think it's quite good that you're looking at the different sectors and everything like that. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll just check if Ali's got his hand up. I don't think, Ali, you've got a question at the moment. If you have, obviously, please put your hand up, because it's good to make sure we've got everyone on the call. I'm just going to check a couple of things, Chantal, with you, if that's possible. One was around the construction workers. It says construction workers, mine in Haringey attends meetings. I'm just wondering what specific support we're looking to offer, because that was an age group that was highlighted a number of years ago now, but there was I'm assuming there was numbers to show that people within that industry, there were higher rates of young people committing suicide. Second question is around the suicide prevention group, which you're hosting, Lynette. Says excellent, you're here tonight. I just wanted to ask you and give you the opportunity. Obviously, you've got all these people listed as attending, and I just wondered if there was somebody you think we're missing from this group, because you're involved in much more community-based. We've got the great and the good here, I can see. But I'm just wondering if you think there are voices that aren't being captured, and it'd be really interesting to hear from yourself, because you obviously host that. So Chantal, just about the construction workers.
Might be easier if we do it the other way around, but yes. So I know that Deborah King attends the construction partnership meetings regularly now, and has and I think they meet on a quarterly basis, and has I think they've been offered mental health first aid training. They're aware of all the services that they can access through the Haringey Wellbeing Network, and also through Mind in Haringey, and also other support services. So our digital offers. Also, there was something specifically for construction workers, and I can't remember the name of the tool. now that has been promoted to them as well.
Thank you. I'm sure you can send that on to us and we'll pop that in the minutes. Thank you, Lynette.
Yeah, definitely agree with Chantel. We're trying to nudge them into doing something responsible, and that's why we keep turning up at the groups to get them at that training, etc., and for them to utilise the support that's available. So that's construction. When I think about the Haringey Suicide Prevention Group, actually the group that's kind of missing from the presentation is that we have lots of lived experience groups that attend our Haringey Suicide Prevention Group. So we have SOBS, which is the group Survivors of Those Bereaved by Suicide. They're a national group. They had one meeting in London. We gave them our building. That means that they can reach out to all of those or anybody that's interested that has lost somebody to suicide. And we've got lots of people in the Haringey Suicide Prevention Group that might be therapists or others that have been affected by suicide. So just to say that we have lived experience in that group. I think if we were thinking about a group that might be missing, it's how do we get some of the grassroots organisations to our groups so that they can be more involved? Unfortunately, they don't always have the time because that is their main asset to be able to attend our groups. But hopefully through the work that we do and other forums that we meet them in, we try to make sure they're informed. But I would say that's a particular group. And we've been trying for quite a while to get the mosque or anybody to attend our group as well. Just thinking about the conversation that we've just had, that culturally those people might not even be recognised in our suicide figures. So I think if I'm thinking about two groups, I would say it'd be great if we could get some more grassroots, but it is a resource implication for them. And if we could get our community members from mosques and any other churches or groups to come, that'd probably be really beneficial. But wherever I go, myself and Deborah are always promoting our group or trying to get somebody to join one or more of our groups. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that's a call out to members as well, because we're all networking in our own groups and organisations. So I think that, you know, those are conversations that we can have as well. So that's really helpful. And I'm sure Councillor Neves has been noting that. I'm sure you've told them before, but I think these are all, it's good to remind us of the people that we may be missing from some of these organisations. So thank you. I'm going to go to Temi. You're going to lead on the next section. If you could just briefly introduce yourselves and say who's going to be speaking at this, particularly noting the very specific question that I posed to you earlier around that, those services that are there for people who are calling the crisis helpline, who are saying they're suicidal, but not actually have got that very set process laid out before them. What services? It's just that we've got reassurance as a committee that there's that acute service to pick up. And also, could you explain a little bit how you interact with the public health?
Yeah.
Because we've heard a lot on this side, but I know you obviously are doing a huge amount as well, and how that works. Thank you.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Temi Fasia. I'm the Adult Mental Health Lead Commissioner in Haringey. I work across both the local authority and the Integrated Care Board, the NHS. And we've just got 2 slide pages. I will just do a quick start on the first one with, I'm going to adapt the first slide to your specific question, because until you gave me the heads up, that's not what we kind of understood the question to be. I suppose to start out with, and we've just put the triangle there, or the pyramid there, to describe a process of saying that every single person at each stage is receiving some support to maintain their mental health and well-being, and that prevents suicide in the first instance. We know all the determinants of mental ill health. Quite a bit of that is social. Chantel has already mentioned a number of things which I will not just talk about, things like the universal support. We've got connected communities, the digital offer, but our primary care GPs play a role in making about suicide prevention, and they're the first port of call more generally to most people, residents in Haringey. Now,
one of the new things that has been put in place is the primary care-based mental health teams. And we've got Sandy, we've got Mark here. They will talk more in more details about that. But the service is primary care-based, and it's funded jointly by the ICB and the GPs themselves. They are groups of mental health practitioners, and they will pick up cases that will not have traditionally gone into secondary mental health. So that additional buffer is in place now, and it started over the last couple of years. And I think that's quite instrumental in supporting people and getting people the support they need as early as possible. As much has been said about the early help and prevention services more generally. So we've got the wellbeing network that plays a very strong role in that bit as a gateway to access support and navigation. I want to just stress that mental health first aid, and that might answer some of the questions that was raised about our different communities and different community groups. So we've been rolling out since the pandemic a lot of training targeted at grassroots organizations, mainly those organizations that work with people from Black and other minority ethnic groups, to ensure that they get the mental health first aid training. It's an evidence-based, nice guided training. And in addition to that, you get some offer around signposting information and packs about the different services in Haringey, just to improve people's awareness, how to talk to people who might have a mental health presentation, but also how to signpost and navigate the different services as they need them. Now, I'm climbing high as we go the pyramid. The other addition that we've got, so if somebody were, so we've got the crisis cafes, as we call them. In Haringey, it's the Safe Haven Crisis Hub. It's also run by Mind in Haringey. The service is available out of hours, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. It currently opens till 9 o'clock. It's going to be extended soon till 10 o'clock. And there are 5 crisis cafes across the NCL footprint. There are arrangements in place for the London Ambulance Service when people call to convey them to the places, well, to crisis cafes. The crisis cafe in Haringey and across the NCL footprint is staffed by people with lived experience. And one of the things that people have told us about the offer they get is people are dealing, because of the genuineness of and the empathy shown by the peer support workers, people will come and respond. A number of the issues people present are mainly social, and mainly about their housing, about debts and those kind of things that could tip people into crisis. So doing that early supports people. And then what happens, it's only a short time limited period. And then people are then stepped down into other opportunities, including services offered through the Haringey Wellbeing Network. We've also got the Crisis Prevention House as part of the long-term plan, the Mental Health Transformation Program. There's some additional investment that has gone to increase the number of beds from 7 as current to 14. And the plan is that the new service will be co-located alongside the Crisis Cafe or the Crisis Hub, and indeed the Clarendon Recovery College at Canning Crescent when it opens. And so they'll be delivering a range of services there. The Crisis Prevention House offers stay away from people's homes. So it's people who are feeling either vulnerable, isolated. They do not need to be admitted onto our hospital wards, and they could stay there for up to 2 weeks with support to then step them back home. Other initiatives really is when people then tip into, just to be clear, there are protocols between the crisis cafes around the type of and the eligibility criteria for access to the service. Because if someone is actively suicidal, then of course the place of treatment would be either the crisis teams or within the inpatient services. But I'll leave our colleagues here from the trust to comment on them. I'm just hoping I've kind of addressed some of the points you were raising, because there has been over the last couple of years these additional service as to people who would traditionally not have access support could access it early, but also put in place things that prevent people from their crisis situations escalating.
Yes, thank you. You have gone over the service offer very clearly, and I think hopefully we've all completely understood what the offer is. I think for me, it's just that point where we heard that if somebody called the crisis line, then they were literally said, well, I'm terribly sorry because you haven't got an active suicidal plan. We're not. I think that there's shock, I suppose, not even surprise, was that, well, they weren't then offered another service. And actually, you're saying there are all these services. So I think the question for me is this information being passed to those who are manning the crisis hotline? Because if it's not, I think that sounds like where the gap is, not the fact you haven't got the services. So anyway, I've got Mark nodding at me, but I'll just let you come back in, because that's where I'm a bit concerned that I've heard one thing, you're telling me something else, and I'm just trying to work out how that marries.
Yeah, actually, when we were setting up the crisis safe haven, we had, and we do have a project group that was running. We had team leaders from the crisis home treatment team, from the telephone crisis service. That the crisis telephone service is meant to be making a number of referrals into the safe haven. I think it's, given the comments that you've made, I think we need to take that back to the leads in the service just to make sure that they are aware of the offer that's available. Take that point. The other thing I didn't mention, which I think might be quite helpful, is that from autumn, there's going to be a soft launch of the NHS 111, and it's going to apply to mental health. And at the moment, the North London Mental Health Partners, and that's the CNI and BEH, are currently doing a recruitment exercise to develop that front door to the service, single point of access to the service. Myself and Laura Mamiam, who is the clinical lead for mental health, were meeting with the manager of the lead of the service this morning, and he's pointed out that there's going to be a range of training that they're going to be rolling out, including something to do with this from the Samaritans. And what we've offered is that we will get our 5 crisis cafes to come do training to the staff team, because we know that these are new staff teams coming into place in the area.
Thank you. I think I'm getting some reassurance that there's going to be that joined up communication.
Sorry, is it okay if I come in? So we have got clear step down and step up processes in the crisis, the safe haven that we deliver. So imagine that somebody walks through the door, because people can just come to the door now and be seen by our staff. If they are actively suicidal, we will step up. So we will make a call to our partners. See Monica nodding, and we will try to step that up, be that the crisis resolution and home treatment team or the crisis line. What's happened, I just think that, different things have been going on, different emergencies. What the managers are now doing is when they come on shift, they're going to make that call to see if there are any referrals that need to be made to our safe haven. So step down, and we'll do the same to them. But Temi's right. I just think it's the more we're together, the more we're doing training, the more we see each other as people, as well as the roles that we hold, the more effective that will happen. But people should never call the crisis line and be told there is nothing. We've all worked really hard, and I see these people in meetings all the time. You're asking what's their connection. I often see Temi and Chantel and Mark in meetings together. So we definitely talk, don't we? A lot.
I have no doubt that you do. It was more, I wasn't meaning you didn't talk. I meant that the yes, the system actually had that information so that the person can be confident to give, sort of signpost that person to the right place. Okay, so I've got colleagues around, and I know Mark, you wanted to come in as well. So I'm going to Councillor Haran, and then I know Mark, you wanted to say something. So if you wanted to come in once, Councillor Haran's asked a question.
It's really to add on to what Kate said, because I used to oversee the crisis telephone service. I don't, and haven't for a couple of years, but I know that there was a lot of work done developing a strengths-based decision tool for calls.
Try the other, yeah, we'll just switch the mic, so do swap your mic.
So I know that a lot of work went into developing, as I say, a decision tool to help the clinicians in the crisis telephone service, and also there was a resource directory. So I suppose if there is a query today for how effectively that's actually working, and I know that, as Temi said, him and Laura have been meeting with Rajiv, who oversees the telephone service, around the developments for 111. I can certainly take back that we would, want to see if someone's not going through to the crisis and home treatment team, what other options are routinely being used.
That's really helpful, and I think that's a really helpful action from today's meeting, that we'll get that feedback, because you'll be able to monitor where those calls go. So I think that's really helpful, and you'll see whether those calls are dropped or whether they get referred to services. So we should be able to get the data back on that, and that'd be really helpful to give us that reassurance that that is actually happening across the piece. So thank you. Councillor Haran.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Temi, for the slides and the presentation. It was really very helpful. So mine, just coming back to that question that I raised earlier. So the question is around gap, because from the slides here, it's not entirely clear to me where the gaps are. So maybe you could talk about the gaps in service, funding, staffing, or all of that, please. Thank you.
I will just introduce that slide and pass on to Mark and Evie. The ask that came through an email to us was a narrative that said, if somebody was to come to the IAP service, they do not take people, but where would they go get some support if they have got suicidal ideation? And that's the way it was worded. So we felt that we needed to describe the intervention and the interface between what's the IAP service, or what's used to be called the IAP service, now called in NHS Talking Therapy Service, and the mental health trust, the practice that has been put in place to just make sure people are not falling within the gaps of different service provision.
So that was actually specifically identified as part of the NHS long-term plan, that there was a group of clients who were too unwell for IAP, but not unwell enough for secondary mental health care. So that has been a key focus of some of the investment, and also some of the new pathways we've developed. For this slide, we've got Evie, who's going to just talk through around the NHS Talking Therapies offer. We've got Sandy Hadley, who oversees the primary care mental health workers, jointly funded by the Trust and GPs. And then I'll just comment on how that fits in with the development of our core mental health services. So over to you, Evie.
Yeah, hello. So my name is Evie, and I'm the lead for Haringey Talking Therapies. It used to be IAP, so that's our new name. So what we offer is a service for patients who have mild to moderate anxiety and depression disorders. And I know it was mentioned that some people might have suicidal ideation, and we might not be the right service, which is not entirely the case. So obviously, like, having suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation is part of a range of mental health problems, especially depression. So that's not an exclusion criteria at all. But what we do is that we do have a risk assessment. It's a risk assessment between every contact we have. So we do it at the beginning when we assess someone. And there is, I guess, what you're talking about is in cases when we think that someone is too risky, because we don't have a crisis provision. The client will go on a waiting list to receive the actual psychological intervention. So if we don't feel assured that somebody's safe to be on a waiting list, then we will do, speak to the crisis team. So we do what we call a safety plan with them, and we'll do relevant referrals. And I think your question was around that gap. So we do accept self-referrals. I don't know if we cover everything. So obviously that some of the exclusion criteria we have is highly complex and high risk when we think somebody cannot actually wait. And as Tammy already mentioned, and Sandy and Mark will come into the conversation, I think we've done many things in the last few years to try and address that gap, because it has been a problem and we recognize that. And obviously now we also have the primary care mental health team, and we have regular liaison meetings when we discuss, like we try not to just discharge people, but we have conversations about what is the right service. So obviously there are things still there's always work in progress, but we have, I think, we have been trying to address that. So I don't know if you want us to finish the conversation and then you ask questions, or you want to ask something now, or should I?
I think useful, given your train of thought, to finish your presentation, that maybe.
That's fine. So should I pass it on with Sandy? Yeah.
Describe the primary care offer as it's developing. Sandy, over to you.
Evening, everybody. My name's Sandy Hutley, and I'm the clinical lead for Haringey Primary Care Mental Health Team. And there were some excellent questions earlier. I thought I might just address them whilst I'm also presenting, because it's part of the work we do. In addition to vulnerable groups, actually another high-risk group at risk of suicide are people who are autistic, and they currently very much underdiagnosed, and men are more likely to be diagnosed than women, because women are very good at masking. So this is another vulnerability and risk group that often don't fit neatly in any service and fall through the gaps. So you were talking about the gaps earlier. That's one of the client groups and they are 25% of our service currently, but I think as we screen more regularly, we will identify more individuals. The other part of the gap that we are plugging at the moment is the fact that there are we focus on need rather than diagnoses. So what we see are people who have been excluded from NHS talking therapies exclusion criteria. However, they very much need an intervention, or some people whose difficulties are so complex that they're unable to engage with secondary care psychology services and end up being re-referred and falling through the net. So our level of complexity can be quite high. We see people within 28 days, and at least we offer an appointment within 28 days, and we use a lot of techniques to engage people who previously in the traditional route weren't able to engage with traditional services. So we're very adaptive in what we offer, and we're flexible in what we offer. And the other gap that we plug is if somebody's in crisis and they're about to commit suicide, we've got our crisis services. We also have our core team for somebody who's high risk and there's complex mental health difficulties. But there's a gap that we are now plugging, is when somebody's made a suicide attempt, yet their needs could be addressed within IAPT. They are excluded from IAPT for 6 months, NHS talking therapies. And we see those individuals within 6 months. So we actually offer short-term interventions to those. So that's another gap that we fulfill to keep that fluidity of support. We also see older adults. There were questions earlier, and we see people 17 and a half and above. So there's no exclusion criteria because we're a flexible service, and we don't operate on a diagnostic way. We operate in terms of needs. We're needs-led, which means it enables us to be very flexible and adaptive to the current population. We also have interfaces with IAPT Weekly to make sure that if anyone's been double referred, we get them into the right service. So and also we don't have people being bounced back to their GP for them to have to re-refer to us. So we make sure that there's no wrong front door. We have monthly interface meetings, which I think there's now 80 invites to, and this involves a lot of the VCS services in Haringey, statutory services, secondary care services, our team and IAPT. And what we do is we have a think together about how to enable someone to not only have treatment, but to also thrive and address holistically their needs, to enable them, to prevent them from deteriorating and requiring services in the future. And if there is somebody who clearly needs mental health support, we then invite them into our IAPT and our team interface to have a conversation to see where would be the best place would be for that person, which means, and then our staff also have a foot in the secondary care core team, which Mark is going to talk about, and they have that interface there to make a smoother transition where somebody does require going into secondary care, and we've prepped them and built that trust in services to facilitate their entry into secondary care where people were falling through the net.
Okay, I'm actually going to ask Mark, is it useful for you to sort of come in with your bit now, or is it because I've got quite a lot of, well, I'm not going to ask a lot, I'm going to ask one or two questions to Sandra because of the time we've got left, but what's the best?
Well, I can just very briefly summarise it. So really, I mean, because I have spoken to you about the development of our core services before, that really it's an expanded offer, which is actually much more a very broad entry criteria rather than based on diagnosis or severity. And I think just to highlight as well for clients referred through to our core services, we've now got 4 weeks, not only to assess, but also to commence treatment. So really, we really, there's an expectation the services are much more responsive.
That was very succinct. Thank you very much. So I know that I'm sure the colleagues have got questions for Sandra. So I'm just going to look down the line. I've got Helena and Councillor Donovan, Councillor Haran. I thought you might. So if you ask those questions, I'll finish off by asking one, and then I think we're going to need to round the session up, because whilst we could spend all night delving into this, it's really helpful, but actually we have got other reports. So I am conscious. Helena.
Thank you. This is a very just basic question on clarification. This line that is open till 9 o'clock and possibly going on to 10, which sounds great. What happens when somebody rings outside that hour? Is there something on there? Are they, I mean, just please tell me that if I ring, I'm not just going to get a ringing tone, or this line is closed between such and such and such and such. I'm interested in the practicalities, please.
Helena, if you're referring to the safe haven, if somebody rings after 10 o'clock, they can also text us and that will be picked up by the Haringey Wellbeing Network. So what they won't have to do is wait until the next evening for somebody to get back to them. Luckily, we don't often get calls like that, but there is a text as well as a telephone number. But people can come in. They don't have to ring us. They can come and knock at our door. And as long as they're there like 5 to 10, we'll see them. They come at 10:30 to our door. Yeah, we've got information about us and contact numbers on the outside of our building. So imagine you're just walking by aimlessly and you're concerned about somebody else. You will see a big poster outside our building that talks just about the crisis service and other contact details. So we're good at getting back to people.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as part of the information that's provided by the Crisis Safe Haven, Crisis Cafe, they also will signpost people out of hours to the crisis telephone service in the trust. And that number is shared widely and there is notification. Also, people are in a very have an emergency, then the signposting would be to A&E if there's an emergency. So there are those information that goes out to patients and people who use services.
Right. The reason I'm asking is that something happened to someone I know and they needed to ring crisis lines and there was nothing at the other end. And in fact, in the end, the ambulance and the police had to come because this person was having such a dreadful crisis. And I'm sure that sometimes you haven't got the resources. I'm just concerned about this kind of thing. Sorry.
Might I suggest that we have a proper focus on the crisis telephone service at some point, because then we could bring in the service leads to provide some reassurance. But it's fair to say that there is a lot in terms of the development around the NHS 111 and how it applies, and the rollout to mental health, which you'll be probably interested in hearing from the service leads at a later date, if that's okay.
I am going to come in because I know a lot about 111. 111 relies on someone being at the other end of a crisis line, because those advisors then have to try and get hold of someone who is an expert. So, you know, 111 tries its best. Sometimes there's not anybody at the other end. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I think a recommendation from the committee, I think, is one that we were already sort of going through with yourselves, is around the crisis line and the data. I think what will be helpful, I think, is that factual data, is to understand what happens on those calls, which ones get dropped, as in, you know, the numbers, ones that get dropped and the ones that should have been referred on to different services. I think that'd be really helpful, because then we can then just very clearly look at if there is a gap or if there is an issue in this area. And I think that would be really helpful for us to understand as a committee, but also to understanding about the signposting and your autumn rollout of this new front door, the single point of access, which I think we've heard a little bit tonight about single point of access, and understanding how that new initiative is actually encompassing your other stuff and how it is actually all going to fit together. So that would be really helpful. Apologies, was it Councillor Brennan next? Okay, and then Councillor Hart. Was it Councillor Donovan? I've got a bit lost as to who's got their hands up.
I'm following on from this. My understanding was that there definitely is a crisis line, a mental health crisis line that works all night and definitely does work. But it's not just suicide, but it definitely does work. I mean, I've had numerous reports.
Yes, the trust has the crisis telephone service, which is the gateway into mental health service. It operates all through the day. But I thought Councillor Kanye's issue had to do with having rang. The person didn't get a response, which seems to be the point you were flagging, or Councillor. Sorry, yeah. So that's how I understood it. There is a service, but the bit is about making sure the response is people are responded to in a timely and effective way. Yeah.
Okay, so we've put the recommendation on that. So thank you very much. But yes, there is the crisis line, helpline. Councillor either O'Donovan or Ngharan, take your pick as to who's going first.
Okay, thanks. There's a couple of targets in the presentation. One is short-term psychological interventions offered within 28 days. And there's also, as I think my colleague was saying, the 4-week target for access to, I think it's the talking therapies. The question is, are you able to stick to those targets, and do you need any help, assistance, either locally or nationally, in order for you to stick to those? This is an underfunded area. The other question I was going to ask is, and it is very gratifying to see so well laid out all the points of contacts and all the work that's happening and the extension of works and the easy way people can access help. But obviously there are people, as maybe we were talking about earlier, people who don't, for various reasons, cultural reasons, personal reasons, reasons of pride, won't necessarily think that they need assistance or want assistance. So there's that layer of what we call earlier the social infrastructure, where people will go to, there may be older people's groups, there may be social groups, there's food banks, citizens' advice and things like that. And when they're just talking to friends about things and or talking to the people that organise those events, and it's clearly that there may be a need for them to talk to someone. Are you, and I'm sure you are, but I just wanted to clarify that you make those people like the lead workers in the food banks, the lead citizens advice, all these other things, churches, there are a lot of them. They know that if they know where their friends and colleagues can go if they need help. Thank you.
Can I very briefly mention about the waiting times that you brought up? So I think, you know, at least in our service, Haringey Talk Therapists, I think we are very quick and do some things very well. And there are some other things that involve some waiting. So, you know, we assess everyone within, well, the majority of the people, like 95%, we assess within 2-3 weeks. The target is 28 days. So they get quite a detailed assessment. And we also have, like, we accept self-referrals. So anything that comes through on the day, there is somebody, a senior on duty. So we call everyone who might be at risk on the day if they see something that is concerning. That is obviously after the assessment, people might go on different treatment options. So some happen much quicker than others. So some options are fairly quick, so within a few weeks, and some treatments, you know, there is unfortunately some waiting time, somebody's like 4 months. So, and I think that's one of the issues if somebody, because risk changes, so not always like doesn't stay always the same. So, yeah, so there can be some waiting, and, you know, obviously you mentioned about, you know, with the funding, but I think there is an issue in general about staffing levels due to, you know, vacancies. So it's not as simple as funding problem always. Sometimes, you know, even if funding is there, sometimes you just can't. So I think one of the issues with waiting times partly is vacancies, so staffing problems. Sorry.
Yes, I mean, the important, in addition to everything you're doing, it's also, we also need those experts, those counsellors trained.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So easy access to those counselling courses.
Mm.
And encouragement of people as well to go into those
Yes,
professions. Thank you.
Sorry, Sean, shall I speak to your other points? Just thinking about what you said about the social infrastructure of Haringey, which is really strong. I mean, we saw that when we were all dealing with COVID. What happened during COVID and afterwards is that we started to look at some of the health inequalities that are obviously widespread in Haringey. And our partners here at this table have funded a project that we've been delivering now for nearly 2 years, where we have actually given money to grassroots organisations in Haringey so that when they're holding their normal session or a tea or a coffee or food, maybe they've got together, they can actually support those with mental health issues in the borough, maybe have a conversation, direct them to the services that you've heard about today. So we work with, at Mind in Haringey, we work with refugee and migrants, we work with the Eastern European and Polish and Ukrainian communities. These are all grassroots organisations doing the work. We just support them and make sure they're skilled up. We work with the Afro-Caribbean community, the Turkish community, and we work with street homeless. So that idea, Sean, where you literally give a group the resources because they can get those people to the help that they need, break down some of those cultural issues, etc. So we're trying to do that now with the help of our NHS partners and the funding. So give the grassroots the money. They'll do better work than us, or some of us.
And maybe just to follow up on that, because of our interfaces with grassroots services, most of us in this room interface together, we make sure that there is a stepped care offer. So as the complexity increases, that's when we've built these very good relationships where staff come to our team and our team take that next level of risk. We did undertake a good piece of work where one of our MHPs is Muslim and she's a practicing Muslim, and she went into the mosques and she started to build relationships with the various women who ran groups there to help them, to point out and help them think about mental health and what they might be, if they do have any concerns, to talk to her and to guide people into our service, but first to have a conversation with us to make sure they go to the right place. So I think one of the things that has been very helpful in this process is the fact that we've built such strong relationships with each other. This has meant that we can think about people in a linear way, in a progressive kind of way, to help them to recover, as opposed to gatekeeping services. It's a very different model. And just to point out, we offer therapy within 28 days. We've got a very differently designed model where we cap referrals in order not to have waiting lists. So it's a slightly different take on that, which it means that there's throughput and flow into it. Yes, we could do with more MHPs, but it's also about maintaining togetherness working that enables people not to over-refer, to really think through referrals, and we support that thinking too. So yeah, to answer your question, we are trying very new and different ways of working.
Thank you. Just because we are way over time, I'm just going to ask Councillor Curran to sort of very succinctly ask his question. Thank you.
Tricky. If you don't mind, I'm just going to push you a little bit on the 28 days, because I think this is an important point. So I work in the NHS, so I'm quite familiar with targets. We've got new targets now. I'm a radiologist. One is, if you land up in A&E, you need to have some form of imaging done, usually within an hour, or if you become an inpatient, within 24 hours. If you're suspected of cancer, the current target starting from the 1st of October is you need to have all of your diagnosis and a treatment plan by 28 days. And then another target, 62 days. So I'm going to push you on this 28 days. Do you think it is fair or right for a person who is in some form of difficulty and crisis to wait for 28 days, up to 28 days to be seen?
Sorry, Tim, let me just come in. So not all of us have a 28-day target. So in the Haringey Wellbeing Network, if you contact us, we will contact you within 48 hours. And you'll probably be in our service within a week. But we work with all of these partners. So sometimes we will hold people to get them into talking therapy, liaise with the primary care, etc. So we are not, hopefully it hasn't sounded like that anybody in Haringey would actually wait 28 days. Because we all work together, they would go somewhere until maybe the most appropriate service. So I know we see people in 2 days.
Yeah, actually, can I also mention about that? So the 28 days obviously is kind of for the first assessment for us is a national target, but it doesn't mean that we wait 28 days. So when a referral comes in, we will do an initial kind of triage, and sometimes somebody might call them on the day. So if there is something quite alarming about the referral risk, something. If not, and it's kind of a referral that doesn't sound high risk, we will send them a message to book in for an assessment, and we'll have a self-booking system. So or it depends on the circumstances. Obviously, if somebody doesn't speak English, they have it's another procedure. So we contact them. So sometimes the wait is for the appointment to actually happen, or for the patient to, book their appointment, but we contact them quite quickly. So we don't actually wait. It's just kind of a national target that we refer to. I don't know.
I was just going to come in and say that it's about up to 28 days. And of course, the different services to do their triaging and then prioritize cases as the complexity of their needs might present. And just also to say that the target, the 4-week wait targets to access, and we're now talking of BEH provided services, a new target as part of the long-term plan. And I think the publication, the collection, and then the publication of the data is going to be set over the next few months. And then when we begin to see the data, we'll begin to see how performance, how we're meeting those, our performance is meeting those targets. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly, Sandra, and apologies, but I'm going to need quite succinct answers, I'm afraid, because we are over time. So I just wanted to just hone in a little bit what you said about the support you give for people who with a new diagnosis of autism or a diagnosis of autism. And I think I understood you also said you provide specialist mental health services for people with a learning disability or no. Okay, so the question that I had, and it really comes from actually the next item, which is the living through lockdown. It was around mental health support. So I was just going to, just because you were in the room, ask if there are any sort of services that are tiered for people with different needs, so that they will come in, they might have special, might have mental health needs, but the way they want to access that support could be quite different from somebody else coming in. It might be sensory, it could be, there's all manner of different barriers maybe for somebody accessing health in the first place, but mental health as well. And I'm a bit concerned that I think this is an area that doesn't ever seem to be discussed or addressed. So I apologise, because I'm happy to take a written answer on this one. If there's any specialist support for mental health, specialist mental health support, for people with autism and learning disabilities, I'm just going to look to colleagues. I'm very happy to have this back as a written answer.
We will refer people to the Autism Hub, and sometimes we'll have people that go to the Autism Hub that are still at Mind in Harringay. But other than that, we're not aware of any other services that we can refer people to at the moment, but it might be that I hear something.
I can come in on that one. If somebody has a learning disability and autism, and it depends on the severity of their learning disability, then there's a learning disability service that's multidisciplinary. If somebody is autistic, but they don't have a learning disability or they have ADHD, we then offer interventions, and we have partnership working with the Autism Hub that we offer the psychological interventions and work in conjunction with the Autism Hub to support individuals who either have a diagnosis, or we screen them and then make the referrals to the diagnostic services for both ADHD and autism. And we tailor our psychological interventions to meet the need to provide a package of care that's highly adapted to people who are autistic, who traditional models may not be as helpful.
I'll just come in briefly to say that as part of the work around post-diagnostic support to people with mental health and autism, there is some money coming from the Integrated Care Board to put in a small team, part of an MDT, bringing together social workers and health professionals within the trust, so that they provide that additional support. That's just been developed at the moment.
We do provide care and treatment for people with autism within our core services already, because it's an area where we are seeing a lot more diagnosis. There's a need, and I think that's why we're working closely with Temi and colleagues to bolster that offer.
Thank you, and apologies because I know it's right at the very end. So it would be really helpful if we could just get a bit more of a written response, a little bit more in depth on that service. If that would be all right, that would be really helpful. Thank you, and that would address that. I'm just going to look to my colleagues. Any recommendations on this other than the main recommendations we've made around the data, the crisis team, and that joined up working with the new autumn push, I think, for the NHS 111 and the sort of front door and single point of access. Was there any other recommendations? No. Oh, okay, excellent. One last one that so we've a minor action, well, an action, not a recommendation, apologies, was the information around the support for people with disabilities, mental health. So mental health specialist services that are for those with either a learning disability or those with autism or any other disability, and just really understanding how that is working together. And as you said, tell me about the new money coming in and hopefully where that will be spent, and ensuring we've captured the actual needs requests from our clients, our residents in that area, and that they're being met. And finally, the one for public health, Chantal, is just really it was just really to understand a little bit more, and this is an action about if we could just have a written response on how you are working, your services are working in that joint partnership way with our mental health colleagues. I mean, I understand with Mind and Haringey, I think I've got that, but I think tonight it really does show that different services are all out there, and it's just really how that is being joined up. It's a difficult one and a lot to ask, and I know it's sort of because we're looking at specifically at suicide prevention, but it's really just understanding how these services are all sort of interlinking and that funding is working across the piece. Just because, yeah, that'd be helpful for us to get it clearly in our heads. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming in. It was a really important topic to do. We did overrun, but because this is such an important area, I thought we should just give this a little bit more time and yeah, resources into looking at it in a more in-depth way. But thank you, everyone, for coming in. Okay, so whilst the majority of you are leaving, thank you very much. We're going to move on to agenda item 8, which is the Living Through Lockdown report. So this is the update to response to recommendations in the Living Through Lockdown report. And I just wanted to say at the outset that this was an incredible report that was put together, working with the Joint Partnership Board, with all the different groups within that, with Public Voice who were sort of helping to coordinate that. And it really captured concerns that were coming up actually whilst we were right in the middle of the pandemic and we were in lockdown, and there was a lot in here that I thought was incredibly useful for us to sort of concentrate in on and be aware of. So this is the report that's come to us this evening. We asked our council colleagues to look at specific areas that were new that had come about because of the Living Through Lockdown report. So the first part of the report is obviously it is about the new or the enhanced services, I think, that are coming through. And then on pages 31 onwards, we've got the Living Through Lockdown report itself, which was the asks from the residents who were part of that report and what they specifically wanted to happen and their areas of concerns and the points that were raised. So I hope you've all had a chance to read this. Because we are by now short for time, I'd rather we spent most of it on asking questions, and I hope that you're happy that we've read the report and that we are cognizant of what's in it, and we're happy sort of to go through. But Beverly, as you're in the room, did you want to speak to any of this just to give that initial flavour?
Caroline is going to do a brief intro. Thanks. Hi, I'm hoping you can all hear me. I'm Sarah Sutton, Assistant Director for Place-Based Commissioning and Partnerships. And yeah, I'm happy to sort of take the report as read, but did want to highlight the focus on new initiatives and how the report sort of 3 years after lockdown continues to influence the services we deliver and the ways in which we work, also in partnership with our health partners. And it was great to hear from Lynette earlier about some of that, and she referenced actually some of the focused work on health inequalities, which has also been a core part of the ways in which we're looking to work differently to try to tackle and address those health inequalities in the borough that were really further evidenced during COVID. This is there has been sort of a couple of other reports I know to you as a panel which focus on a number of recommendations that are now implemented as business as usual. So this really does focus on some of those key areas that we're working towards and that we continue to kind of change and evolve. So there are a number of initiatives, and I'm happy to take questions from the panel.
Excellent. So I'm going to look to my colleagues. I've got Councillor Opoku who'd like to ask a question, and then Councillor Brennan, if we take those two questions first.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think with the pandemic, it highlights how communities work together and everything really well. And I keep on getting a number of emails from groups, particularly with the food networks, where they actually have a lot of food that they get and they don't know how to distribute them to the community. They may have a venue that they meet, but then a lot of the food ends up wasted. So they want to know how can they work with the council so that they can actually give the people who need the food and not waste them. So it's a matter of how can we get them to work with yourself, because they're very keen to actually support the community in that way.
Councillor Brennan, do you want to ask your question? Thank you.
I've sort of got a lot. I went through the second report, and some of the things seem to me that could be carried over and be relevant to now. And I just wanted to know whether we're doing them. So some of the things we've been aware for a long time that carers, unpaid and especially unpaid carers, are financially disadvantaged. And in one way that they're disadvantaged is travelling nowadays, because but this applies to carers and unpaid carers, because the paid carers, 15 minutes for a job, and nowadays they can't travel easily. And I really do think that they deserve to have a similar thing to a blue badge, a carer's badge. I think that I know it's coming, it's not just for the pandemic, but it's sort of like sprung to mind. That's one thing. Then I've got the thing, then they were asking for unpaid carers ID cards. If we're going to have another pandemic, I do think that should be put in place, because they did have problems. Carers had problems, many more problems than normal people, and they're very often vulnerable, and they have to be treated as vulnerable, because they might pass on the pandemic to the people they're caring for. Then we have the thing about they've mentioned default financial assistance, and I know that you say that you have set up this. I saw you'd set up the financial option in your opening paper, but it just falls short of identifying people who are clearly not going to be able to pay and might not apply. And I wondered whether we could do anything more on IT to actually do that, because we know so much about the residents, and whether we could actually automatically offer it if we know that people are in trouble. Then we've got the things about if there's another pandemic, car parks for blue badge holders, car parks in parks, cafes in parks. It would be great if they could at least offer an out of cafe, outside service. So could we set these things up for next time it happens? Because I think that it is true that it makes you lonely if you can't even go to a cafe and buy a coffee. It would have been a good thing. Some cafes did offer it, but we could have said, as a policy, as a Haringey policy, we asked cafes to do that by default. What else do I have? I have digital exclusion. We're working on that, but I think we should still work on that, because it's a problem for so many of our residents. And that policy of do not resuscitate, I don't see anywhere in the document that you've looked into that and reported back on that. I think that's everything.
Okay, that was a number of points.
Yeah.
So I think that
Sorry.
that's fine. I think a quick whip through on those, but we'll start with Councillor Pokus. Thank you.
Thank you. So coming back to the food network, it's actually a really good time and opportunity. So there is a food network coordinator that the groups and individuals could make contact with to understand how they could connect in with either another member of the food network or work in conjunction with a voluntary and community sector organisation to support or distribute food. There's some challenges with sort of the type and nature in relation to perishable foods. But be happy to connect anyone into the network coordinator who could maybe take a more sort of rounded approach to ensuring that those connections take place. We are also working on a food action plan, and that will be coming through shortly, and members of the food network have really supported the development of that food action plan. So there will be an opportunity for engagement with the community in relation to that and what else we can do working together in partnership to ensure food security for residents of Haringey. So that's the first one. Turning to carer support, I'm glad you raised it. It's actually a key initiative this year, and we've been able to secure some funding through our Better Care Fund to ensure that we are enhancing carers support in particular. And my colleague Vicky, I'm sure, will be able to add to that if there's anything further to say, and she might be able to take the particular point on ID cards. Is that all right, Vicky?
Hi, so thank you very much. I'm not sure what you mean about the ID card bit, Sarah, but the carers support, there is a new carers. I did briefly touch on it at the last scrutiny, but carers support, we've set up 3 locality meetings with carers across each locality specifically aimed at those communities. And some funding has been attached through the Better Care Fund to support those carers in the ambitious way that they want to take their role forward within those communities. Those dates are in September. Caroline Humphreys has been coordinating that and working with different groups across Haringey and specific carers. And I can put the dates in the chat if you think it would be useful so that you can take it off. And a little bit of a memo around what will the facilitation be, what the opportunities are, how much funding we've aligned to each locality area. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Turning to the comments around financial support. So we do use the Household Support Fund, which is funding that's come from the government to support people. Originally it was through COVID and then morphed into support during the cost of living crisis. And just to reassure that we do take a data-driven approach to that, we've got lots of access through our low income family tracker that really helps us to target those in most need of financial support. And we do issue direct vouchers to those households using that data. And in addition, there is the Haringey Support Fund, which is our local assistance welfare scheme that people can apply for. In part, that is supported again by the government funding, but that's where people find themselves in crisis, and that can help support during I suppose, a one-off challenging time. And we do maximise that alongside the piece of work that's highlighted in the report through the Here to Help campaign and the financial support team. And a core part of that is about enhancing and making sure that we are maximising sort of benefits and income for individuals that are able to claim that. And you know, there continues to be an area of focus for us because we do know that there are large sort of millions of pounds potentially in unclaimed benefits. So just to reassure that continued work focuses our resources in particular on income maximisation. There is government funding until March next year through the Household Support Fund, and we will wait to see what the further guidance and whether there is any continuation of funding towards the latter part of this year. But the proactive work absolutely continues alongside. Parking, I would have to defer to my colleagues in our environment and neighbourhoods team. So if I may take that away as a written question, we'll come back on that. And again, to reassure the panel that there is a lot of work happening in the area of digital inclusion. Haringey has recently joined LOTTI, which is the London Office of Technology and Innovation, and through that there's a huge amount of resources for sort of a pan-London approach and focus to digital inclusion, but we do have sort of a coordinating activity cross council to really focus in this area. And indeed some of the inequalities funding that's highlighted in the report, some of the projects that supports does also link to supporting digital inclusion. For example, there's a sort of coffee and computers session that's run locally, and that's just sort of one example of a number of areas around promoting digital inclusion. Thank you. On the do not resuscitate point, which I think was the final, I would have to defer to health colleagues on that. Vicky may have an answer. If not, maybe we'll come back with a written response.
Okay, I'm going to say that as a written response. Thank you. I've got Councillor Desneves to come in and then Councillor Horan. Thank you.
I just thought I'd come in on the I was thinking about what you were saying about coffee and cafes and etc. I think one of the things that we did that built on some of the things that we learned through the pandemic was the Warm Spaces initiative. Whilst that's not outside, it was a different way of thinking about how we encourage people to support one another. And we extended that to Gold Spaces, and we will do Warm Spaces. And I can imagine in the event of another situation, I suppose like the pandemic, we might well just think about how we develop those in different ways in order to help people feel supported in whatever way is most appropriate. But I just thought it was important to say we have gone on to do some other things beyond that around spaces and people coming together in the community.
Thank you. I think that was a very succinct roundup of the answers to the questions I think Councillor Brennan posed. So thank you. Councillor Horan.
Thank you. Mine is more sort of a generic comment question. There's a lot of initiatives here, loads of projects. But what I would like to know is some feedback on the outcomes of these initiatives and maybe a little bit more meat to the various projects and possibly even actually value for money and what we're going to maybe say we can't do this anymore and what we're going to do. Because I think there's a lot here, and a lot of fantastic initiatives, but it's not clear to me the outcomes and the value for money. And I just need to see a little bit more. So that's an ask. Thank you.
Okay, is there a response to that? Okay, Sarah.
Happy to come back. I think a number of them, actually it's too early to have true sort of evaluation and outcome monitoring. So for example, the Inequalities Fund, we did have a partway review, but that's up for a full evaluation of in quarter four, so at the end of this financial year. But happy to come back with some further feedback and evaluation. There are some areas where we have more detail than others, and this I suppose was more around just highlighting some of those initiatives, but there are a number of areas where it hasn't really been long enough that the programme has been initiated for us to do a full evaluation, but we can certainly bring it back in due course.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent recommendation, Councillor Karen, about just exactly what you said. I don't think I need to change it in any way, and I think that would be really helpful at an appropriate time when you feel that your initiatives are. I think you've got pilots. You've got the pilot community chest that I noted as well. That looks really interesting, and so I'd be absolutely. I think there's projects we evaluate in quarter four. I think you might have already said that in 2023/24. Okay, so I've got Councillor Donovan.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. And yes, there's some initiatives there. We're reflecting the initiatives and how they can be continued. And I know the council are continuing some, but also community groups, the mutual aid and other food banks, etc. The work that was successful during COVID, people want to continue, and those links. There's some recommendations that we can do locally. Some maybe more London-wide initiatives and others national. So I wonder where this report will go. I mean, obviously, I would think many other boroughs will have similar reports. Will they be evaluated on a London-wide basis? And nationally, there's the COVID review coming up, the investigation coming up soon, and I hope I mean, Partygate may be important, the PPE scandal is important, but actually what they should also be looking at are the local, how things happened locally, what went wrong, what went right, what can happen better in the future. So I hope this report will have some way of feeding into the national debate. Thank you.
Happy to feed back on that, in so much that we are actively a part of the COVID inquiry through London councils and the Local Government Association. It's at the earlier stages of the inquiry at the moment, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity, and we most certainly will make submissions if there is any requests on sort of this particular topic and learnings from the lockdown experience. So we'll if that's part of the inquiry and requested, we absolutely will make sure that we make an appropriate submission.
Okay, thank you. And I just again want to reiterate how I thought this was, maybe it was happening everywhere else, but the fact that it was actually being done during lockdown, that first lockdown, I think was a testament to all the people who actually wanted to put forward and wanted to sort of feed in and sort of give initiative ideas and ways of improving things for next time. Well, hopefully there's not a next time, but if there was, how things could be looked at. So I think it is well, I think it's quite unique, but you might find that other councils have them as well. But who knows? We might find out if it does go London wide, as Councillor Donovan was suggesting. I've got Councillor Carnier. Helena, it's because you were called councillor. I know, it's because you were called councillor earlier, and I nearly said something, and I thought, oh, Helena.
No, best not.
Helena.
Hi, Sarah. I wonder if I could, I mean, first of all, can I say how pleased I think the Joint Partnership Board would be to see such a response on so many fronts. I mean, that's great. I have some questions. How strange that is. Under 311, you're saying that under bereavement, there's going to be more support, but it doesn't actually say what. So it would be, don't need to tell me now, but I really do think if you're going to put in a report like this, a little bit more detail would be helpful. I mean, we could all say there's going to be more. It would be helpful. Under 3.3, community networks, is there going to be anything for the Eastern European community, which is a large community in our area? And I see we have women, I see we have Latin American, Turkish, and communities were really important during the pandemic. People want to see that continued. So that's another one. Parks and parking, two very different things, but they made up a lot of emotional input into that report. And I'd like to make a plea for some kind of feedback on parks, not just about cafes, but these are spaces that people really value. And I know you've had there is a strategy, but on the ground, I've heard a lot of kind of input from people with children, people with dogs, that these don't mix. Yes, they do if you've got socialized animals. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about what you're going to do with parks, because that was a big thing. People, especially people that lived in flats, that had nowhere to go, etc. And well, let's not get into parking. You have your own problems there, but it would be good to see that sorted. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. And I'll just, sorry, before you answer that, Sarah, I'll just check if Ali would like to ask a question. So there's a hand up on the, sorry, because I'm not always very good at noting that. So Dominic, I'm just going to check. Oh. Sorry, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Eleanor, for noticing that I was deliberately vague in the report on bereavement. It's because we haven't, that hasn't been finalised yet by colleagues within our integrated care board. So discussions are ongoing around the quantum of investment and the services that will be delivered through that. So I will follow up back to the panel once that has been agreed, just to make sure that you are aware. We know that we have ring-fenced funding available, but the actual design of the service is to be confirmed. So hence why that was somewhat vague. In terms of Eastern Europeans, there is an Eastern European network. I suppose this was, the report was just highlighting an example, and indeed that Eastern European network really came into its own to help support the response, both council and community response, in terms of the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. It hasn't met recently, but there are plans for it to meet again in the future, and there most certainly is a collaborative network of individuals and voluntary and community sector organisations within that network. So there is one, and parks and parking. I will come back to you on, if I may, just to liaise with kind of colleagues from relevant departments in the council to come back more substantively. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Snebs.
And could I just add to what Sarah said, which is at the moment we have welcome hubs across the borough, as you'll know, that support a range of different communities. And we do have one that meets regularly in Wood Green, which specifically is run by some of community members of the Eastern European community in Haringey. And so it's a really good example of co-support and building that and creating that space in which communities can help each other.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a couple of questions and one or two small little points to raise. I just would like to say that I have come into contact with the finance support team, and I'd just like to put it on record that my interactions with them have been incredibly positive. They've taken on some very difficult cases, or complex, I would mean. And I'm really grateful that we've got that level of support and that depth of knowledge in there. So for all other councillors that may not have accessed this yet, I would, on the ones that I've already done, I would recommend that, you know, it's a great resource. The bit that I just wanted to bring up, so Vicky's put on the chat about the carers event. I'm just checking with Vicky, is that something that that councillors can go along and listen to as part of this event, or is this something that is happening and that we will hear back from? I'm just checking because you've given us dates.
Thank you, Councillor Connor. So anybody can attend. It's been organised with Caroline Humphreys, who is our Head of Service Improvement and Development, alongside a Head of Service and Localities. So it will be an opportunity for people to meet heads of service from those localities. We've asked that multi-agency workers could attend as well. They're going to be doing carers assessments on that day on site. So it's hopefully it's going to be a really, really positive piece of co-production, working within our communities and understanding at the best level the needs and how they would like to move forward with the carers opportunities in those communities. So I welcome anybody to attend. Thank you.
Well, excellent, because I was going to ask you about co-production, but I should put that to one side for the moment. So we've got at the very beginning of the Living Through Lockdown reports on the report from Joint Partnership Board. I think one of their biggest asks was around information and communication. And I do want to say that Haringey Here to Help, I did look at the site. It has got some excellent pages. The volunteering page was phenomenal. However, I did note on the pages, on the links that I clicked, they were all last updated October last year. So I was just going to check, because it, you know, I then didn't follow up any of these specific things, because obviously, you know, I was just checking to see what it would be like, as it's mentioned in the report. But it did look like an excellent resource. But I just wanted to check that somebody is actually looking at those pages and updating them, because that would be a shame if that sort of dies off. So that's an action that I hope we can take from tonight. And then the other bit was around Oh, yes. The last bit, I think that we heard a lot from, or I certainly did when we were coming out of the pandemic, was around people's ability to access face-to-face for appointments, both in hospitals and with their GPs. Now, and we've got blood tests and different things on the actual list here, but I think the wider ask has been for this to improve. And my understanding is that in some areas it's going much more back to normal, but in other maybe GP practices and within other hospital appointments, it still has that digital offer or that sort of telephone triage rather than a face-to-face appointment. I just wonder if there's anything that you're aware of around support for maybe practices or other, it's difficult because, it's a different commissioning, but I don't know what with this new joint way of working, if there's any sort of pressure, I could say, that could be brought to bear using these sorts of reports and these sorts of pushing back from residents around getting back to that face-to-face offer. And then my final thing is on care homes. A big thing in that was about support for residents to be able to contact relatives. And we saw the initiatives with the phones and the iPads, but I wondered if that was still happening, because I know of a lot of residents whose relatives are at quite a distance for whatever reason. Daughters and sons have moved away and grandchildren. Is there something within care homes that we're still asking if those staff are able to support, somebody in their 80s to actually bring that iPad out and actually have that communication with? Because I've been in a few recently and I haven't actually seen any indication that that's still happening. Now, it probably is, I just don't know. And I just wondered if it was something, again, because it was just building on what was really good. And then I'm hoping we're not going to lose it as things return to slightly more semblance of normal. So thank you.
Thank you. So coming to the first point, which was in relation to making sure the web pages are being updated regularly, we actually have done a recent review in line with the implementation of the new council website. So I'm fairly reassured that that is the case, and October makes sense in terms of the update because it was the last substantive change in terms of the household support fund. But I'm happy to take that away and double check. In terms of access, that obviously continues to be a priority, and I know it's a priority for members and ward councillors as well, in particular improving GP access. You may be aware that there's, I suppose, significantly improved public data that's available now, which highlights the level of access across GP practices. And I know, and I speak on behalf of colleagues within our integrated care board, that there is an absolute focus within primary care on improving access and the balance of access and what that looks like. I think for some people, the online appointments work really well, myself included. I declare an interest there, but clearly there is a need to make sure that the balance is right and that face-to-face is available for those people that need it. So again, that might be something, if we want a more substantive update, we could defer to health partners to provide. I also know it's a topic of discussion regularly at Health and Wellbeing Board, as Councillor Dasnevs, I'm sure, can agree with that. So happy to come back more substantively on that point if that is needed. Care homes is something I would need to check. I don't know if Vicky has further feedback in relation to that, but again, I think we'd need to check with providers there to be able to give an accurate response.
Sorry, Vicky.
Thank you, Councillor Connor, Chair. So in relation to care homes and communicating with relatives, despite lockdown and coming out of it, within individual support plans, that should be part of their care and support. So I would expect to see the same levels of communication methods pre-lockdown and after lockdown. In relation to the equipment, the iPads, the phones, etc., none of that equipment has been removed and it is still in situ. and I would encourage care homes to continue to work in that way. But just for reassurances, I'm going to message John Tomlinson, Head of Commissioning, and ask him to do a full check with everybody and who's still using it and if there's any issues. And I'd be happy to bring back that to scrutiny next time. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, that would be really helpful actually. Addressing sort of loneliness, even in the care home, you still want your nearest and dearest, don't you? Okay, so thank you very much for all the feedback we've had this evening. So Councillor Donovan.
Yes, sorry, just very quickly, I wanted to just reflect the importance of the coordination group that's addressing racism and racial equality in health and care. And I know the work of that is continuing, and it would be good at some point to hear the outcomes of that. And I'm sure it's going to be a continuing process. And again, it's going to be probably a London-wide and a national debate in relation to that. But I do welcome the work that's been done around in that area. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I was just going to say we've got one major recommendation from Councillor Haran and then some actions from the committee. I'm just going to check see if there's any other recommendations that the councillors wish to make. Councillor Brennan.
It's just leading on from yours. I did actually have written down the fact that the Here to Help, when it was launched, it was really, I was so impressed by it. And since its launch, I hadn't seen so much about it. I felt like it should almost be kept in the forefront because I think it's such a good initiative. I thought maybe we could do continue some more communication about it so that, you know, it doesn't sort of get forgotten or anything. That was in my notes. Thanks.
I think a recommendation, because I think one of the major things was about information and communication, and actually that did seem to tick an awful lot of boxes in that regard. And to be fair, I didn't realise very much about it until this report. I clicked on it and I was very impressed by what I saw. But again, I'm not sure how widely known it is. So I think, you know, how if we could look at, or maybe there could be some work done to look at how maybe this could be spread more widely and distributed more effectively, maybe with your communicators. I think you've got coordinators, haven't you, in this report across the piece, maybe going out with those people that are accessing different communities, I think would be really helpful. So if we could do that as a recommendation from this committee, that would be really good. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to everyone on the call today for the Living Through Lockdown. Beverly.
Thank you. I suppose I just wanted to conclude by thanking Helena and the team at Healthwatch for initiating the original report, the original inquiry that was co-produced. And I think on the back of that, you've seen some really good sort of work. And we'll come back to you on terms of outcomes, etc. Thank you.
It's always nice to be thanked. Thank you.
Stole my thunder, but I'm glad you did. So thank you very much, Beverly, for that. So we're going to go on to our final agenda item, which is Cabinet Member questions to Councillor Neves. So she is here obviously today to speak to us about, well, any initiatives or areas that she feels it pertinent for us to know and understand as committee and as members. And also an opportunity for us then to ask questions. So Councillor Neves, we haven't got an enormous amount of time. I'm really sorry. You've been slightly curtailed. It's unusual, but you know, we're kind of at that piece. But if we overrun, then that is absolutely fine. If you've got those things that you need to sort of tell us and we need to sort of scrutinise and ask about. So I'm going to go over to Councillor Neves and then we'll have some opportunity to ask questions.
Well, I was thinking we'd just go straight to questions. I know I often rabbit on, but got more chance for questions this time instead.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at this end and I ask Councillor Brennan, Councillor Haram, and then Councillor Donovan, Councillor Poku, Helena, and myself, and Ali, obviously, as well. So we'll go in that order. And so if you can ask your questions, and then we'll take it two people at a time. Thank you.
Okay, well, I've got a generic question, Lucia, which was because you're having to make cuts, save money on every single budget, and how, or is the adults social care exempt, or how on earth are we going to save any money on our budget? What have you got in mind?
Focused on mental health. I would like an update on Canning Crescent, given that this is a significant, I would say, crisis prevention house that currently is out of action for our residents. So I'd just like an update on that, please. Thank you.
Thanks for the question on the budget, Kathy. You know that we're going to have a full session where we're going to talk through the plans, and at that point we'll bring here both all the challenges and all the ideas. Things are extremely challenging, and it is important to say that I think the teams and local authorities across the country are deeply frustrated by the government's refusal to really address and tackle and look at how we can have systemic change in order to provide better services and be properly funded. There are issues around workforce, there are issues around the right right kinds of services and the market available, the availability of placements, etc. So you're right, they're really challenging times, and it's keeping me up at night and a lot of other people too, working that out. I don't like the idea, the word cuts. I'd say that we will work really hard in this team to support our residents and make sure we deliver, well, after all, our statutory services, and be as efficient and effective as we can be. So I think that's where I would focus on, but more to come at a whole session on that, when we can have a really more fulsome discussion, I think, on that question. I don't know if the team want to say anything else. Probably not. No. Okay, fine. Sorry, I'll just move this over here so I'm slouching. On Canning Crescent, it's a source of deep pain. Canning Crescent, I think everyone in the room knows that. I think it's important to say that at the moment, as you've heard, the services are being delivered differently, being delivered the way they were being delivered before. It was the vision when the idea first arrived at Canning Crescent that we would bring all those services together and it would be different and be better. Anyone who's had a building project on their house knows what it's like, or what it's possibly like things to go wrong with your builder. And a project of this scale had that propensity, and unfortunately that is what happened. And we have been, I think it's fair to say, significantly let down by the contractor. And what we've had to do is pick up the pieces after that. It's also important to add that it is also what happens when there are economic crises and the government maybe doesn't act in the way that it should and causes those crises. It affects businesses, and it's something that I think is not talked about quite as much as it could be in the media. How much time, for example, in our local authority we've had to spend picking up the pieces of working through a project that was abandoned by a contractor, which is in essence what's happened. So what the team rather have been doing is looking at what had been done, what still needed to be done, and who will do it. And that's what's been happening over the summer. And we've gone out to a range of contractors. They've come back and are still coming back with their plans and proposals, and also how long that will take. So I hope that in the next couple of months, we'll have a sort of plan and a way forward, but it is a significant delay. It's a shame the others have left, because I know they've done a lot of work in how to sort of keep things going and serve our residents in the meantime. But you're right, it is our vision that we want to have Canning Crescent bringing together those different services in one place. And as it will be in our ward, it will be supremely exciting when it happens. But unfortunately, it is delayed significantly because, of course, lots of contractors are busy. And we've seen that, and since some go bust, then others are more in demand. So it isn't straightforward, but there aren't easy answers. And the other thing we'll do is also make sure we'll ask ourselves, was there anything that we could have done differently in the procurement? I suspect that some of the things in there are a bit unpredictable, but I think council should ask itself that question, and will do. And I certainly have asked that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I mean, you heard today of the life-saving work that people who deal with suicide prevention, but also mental health as well, to help people before they even get to crisis. And you obviously know also all about the health initiatives that we're undertaking at the moment. Again, not just to assist people when they have to go to hospital, but try to prevent them going to hospital. All the work you also do around older people, dementia and everything. And one thing that we also know from you and also from Beverly, if we ask any detailed question about a particular thing, you will be able to answer us. But I suppose it's the whole vision thing, you know, how, as the cabinet member and how the director, how you bring all those things together. What is your vision for a health, as we always say, a healthier Haringey? Maybe not from cradle to grave, because the cradle bit is probably taken over by another cabinet member, but from adult onwards. It seems the problems you have obviously related to finance, and it's also related to how you can coordinate, maybe not even coordinate, but use the resources of all these different community groups, the civil society, the resources of the council, into yes, how do you do it? How do we make a healthier Haringey? You know, easy question. You know, think long term, the next 10 years. How do we do it? How do we bring everything together?
Okay, so not a quick answer on that one then. So I've got Councillor Opoku now. She's going to give up her spot to just concentrate on that one.
Just in our spare time, eh? When we've got a little else. Yeah. It is a big question. But it's a good question. So thank you. So I think that we just talked about budget, and I think there is a challenge because early intervention and prevention, you're right, are really important, but it's a battle to keep those and prioritise those things when you're also delivering. So I feel like, and hopefully people in the room will agree, that I've tried to hold on to that really important tenet and say this is really important, because when times are tough, it could be easy to just be focusing on delivery and not to be thinking like that. And I think taking that into every space, and Sean, I know you were at the Inclusion Health event last week, and I think taking into every space that thought of, because you're right, is about that. For me, it's really great that you mentioned the next 10 years, because I was in a meeting last week. I think Beverly was there actually, and I think that's what I was talking about. I was saying, well, how do we not lose sight of, because what we do now affects what happens in 10 years' time. We know we have those indices of deprivation, but we know that we have poverty, and we also know we have lots of people with multiple conditions, 2, 3 long-term health conditions, and those have difficult outcomes as life progresses for people. So I think that kind of health in all policies, that looking at how we think about health and well-being every time we're sitting around a table having a conversation about what it might be it about housing, be it about education, be it about work, and thinking about how all of those things contribute to that. It feels timely because we're about to renew our health and well-being strategy, and we're going to go out to people in Haringey and ask, well, what does being healthy mean to you, and what does that look like? And some of the project I think Sarah mentioned earlier, the community chest, is exactly about how we support and enliven the local grassroots, perhaps smaller organisations who are already working in the borough to trial and test things that can work. So I think that's part of the vision is we don't have all the answers, but when you were at that, so working closely with the voluntary sector and the communities is really important so that we can find answers together. And when you were at the Inclusion Health event, you know that I said something like the magic happens when we work together, and I really passionately believe that. So if I was going to say anything about my vision, it would be that it's about us always collaborating, not trying really hard not to be. It's really easy to be in your lane and to be kind of focusing on one thing, but actually to be quite broad. And I know in our house building program, yes, we're thinking about making homes, but we've also got bespoke housing in there for people who have disabilities, who have needs, etc. So it's about trying to overlay health and well-being across everything that we do. I can't say we always do that, but I think that's an aim. And I think the Health and Wellbeing Board, Health and Wellbeing Strategy is a platform on which to do that and to plan for those next 10 years. But it is challenging, and I'm not sure that, truthfully, and I'm a politician and I would say this, that government is always is at all good at supporting those aims at the moment, both financially but both through the structures. So we are battling some of those hardships.
My questions are around a little bit more of a detailed thing, and it's about the other end. It's about our residents in Haringey, and it's about winter preparation and COVID and flu vaccination organisation. Excuse me. And the delivery of it. Can I just say that my experience of it is pretty bad. I'd like to know who's in charge for Haringey. Somebody said to me, it's the NHS. That's not good enough. There has to be a part of the NHS that is actually in charge of it. Who answers questions for Haringey residents when things are not going right? And who solves those problems? And if I can just give you an example, you're pushed towards doing it digitally. But when you try and do it digitally and it refuses to actually recognize your password, I'm not changing my password because something doesn't know what it is, for instance, then you're pushed towards waiting over 30 minutes for somebody to answer the 119 call who doesn't know a lot about it and certainly can't answer, solve problems. So I just would like to know, where is your input there and how you actually help the residents of Haringey to do something about this?
Thank you, Helena. Is that in relation to accessing like your flu and the COVID jabs as well?
Yes. It's flu and COVID jabs, both. Mine was only one, but it's the same line.
So I'll give you my answer, which is about my bit, and then I'll bring Will to talk about some of those technical questions. Yeah. And Sarah might have some observations as well. So it's Health and Wellbeing Board this week, and we'll be talking about some of those things. You're pleased to know. You'll be pleased to know. And so that is what I do. I spend my time writing emails, haranguing, asking about these matters. Important to say, everybody has the right to have a GP appointment, and it can be in person, it can be online, and it can be over the phone. Those options are, we're told by government, we're entitled to. So therefore, I spend some of my time advocating and making sure when I hear instances of that not being the case, advocating for that. You'll know that health is run by the ICB in North Central London. And then, of course, we have our local partners, the Primary Care Network and the GP Federation, who support on the delivery of some of these things. And so I think that's my job as Chair of Health and Wellbeing Board, is to communicate with those and to communicate regularly what communities are feeding back, what people are saying, the kinds of things that you're saying now, Helena. And perhaps I'll bring in Will to talk a little bit about just how the structures work and a little bit about the vaccine programme coming up.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, Helena, you did mention this at the Inclusion Health Summit. So I'm sorry you've had your bad experience with the COVID vaccination. And I think the system is a little bit behind. Can't speak for other parts of the country because everything kind of got moved forward a month, and I don't think we've caught up yet. Just in terms of flu vaccination is available in pharmacies at the moment across the borough. I know because I had my flu vaccination at the weekend. So you can get flu vaccination through pharmacies, and I've also got an invite from my GP practice as well because of I'm eligible for it. So I think flu is a bit more straightforward because it's provided through all GP practice and pharmacies. COVID, I think we need to provide more certainty around access locally for this year, and we'll be doing that shortly and through Health and Wellbeing Board discussions. So while the ICB is kind of leading on the rollout and the sort of national NHS, we do work closely in public health with the ICB and with the GP Federation as well. So we just need a bit of clarity on that, and we'll provide information as soon as possible and make sure we get that right.
I think it would be really helpful if residents could find somewhere where they get this information. I mean, I did harangue Will, it's true, but not everybody can. So it's really important.
I think that's right. And I have been having some recent conversations with Sarah about the borough partnership and how we, it's a broader issue that will have come up in other groups you sit on, Helena, just about how we communicate about everything that's going on in the borough, how people know about the services they might access if they've got a particular condition. I just wanted to say something that just feels important for me to say in answer to what you've said, which is that 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with some senior bodies from people from the ICB, and it was all the chairs of health and wellbeing boards across North Central London. And what had just happened is government had just said, right, we're bringing all the vaccinations forward. And as if when one says that, it then becomes thus, and it just happens. So forgive me for playing the politician and saying, but we asked in that group, oh, okay, well, are you going to be ready to bring it all forward? And we were told, yes, it's been said that it's coming forward. So therefore it is happening. Yes. So I'll leave it there, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the bit I've heard is that that will be working hard to try and get some clarity around this, and that it'll be well communicated, hopefully, to all our residents, and what to do if, for whatever reason, you get knocked out when you're trying to book your COVID vaccine. Where do you go to next in order to try and work out what's the best way to do this? Otherwise, I can see people inundating their GPs with phone calls to ask what to do next. So I think that might be an ask. I'll leave that over with you, Will. There you go. Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. So two or three things that have been coming up with me recently. One is around, and I bring this up, so if a member's got a concern and it's related to something within adult social care and we put it through our members' inquiry, I'm just asking, is there a way that could be responded to in a way that we don't need to know the information, but we just need to know that it's happened? And if there's a trail of issues that we also need to be aware that it's been actioned by somebody somewhere, that could happen, because I find that what happens is that I send in an email and then I have to send sort of 3 or 4 different emails over a period of time just to check what's going on. And I think obviously that's not great for me, and it's not great for the person receiving them either. So I'm sure this is an IT issue that hopefully we could look at. The communication with residents. I've had a number of residents recently who said we don't want to make complaints, but they've got a concern and it's quite urgent and it's about something, but they're desperate not to make a complaint because they don't want to go down the complaints process. They just want it resolved. And I think it's that bit that's escalated a little bit more than the everyday, okay, there's an issue, but it's that next level up. But neither side really wants this to escalate to a complaint, but they all want it to be resolved. And I think it's just around what's going on there. And then a final bit is around the idea of co-production and co-design. I mean, we've had some great pieces of work that have been evidence to us around how this is working and how this is going on. And we're going to be coming back to this in the work programme. But I think it's really interesting to hear from yourself as a cabinet member how you feel that this it's new. I mean, it's newish way of changing to this co-production is resonating with residents, and how you feel that there's an understanding within our resident population of what this means, because I know it means different things in different times for different groups in different projects. I'm just wondering how well you think we're communicating that out so that residents get a bit of a handle on what we mean when we say there's a potential for co-production here, because obviously not everything can go down the co-production route. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Pippa. On members' inquiries, I might bring Vicky in a minute. I think that it's fair to say we felt that there's some improvement needed, and that's been acknowledged. And I think the service have been working really hard, and I understand had cleared quite a lot of inquiries that needed clearing very recently. So I think we're on a journey of improvement. I think Vicky's also doing some work on the tech side, so we have something a little bit more technologically, what's the word? Advanced is probably not a word, something that just works. Robust. Thanks, Beverly. Technologically robust. So I think it's watch this space on improvement, but I don't know if Vicky had anything else you wanted to say on that one.
If I may, thank you very much, Councillor Desnebs. We did make significant improvements. There were backlogs as a result of sometimes not coming through, but stuck in the system. We've redesigned the way that we manage complaints. They're held by the business manager and a head of services taking full responsibility on a weekly basis to ensure that they're followed through. So we've really strengthened our internal methodology. On top of that, I say that, but then we got 20 last week just put in, and some of them were really old. So I think corporately, we've got a lot of work to do to redesign how that looks like, and a digital platform will really support that, absolutely. But we are on a journey, and we did have a lot of success, and we're going to continue to have that success so complaints are dealt with in a timely manner. I'll just address your members' concerns and people who don't want to complain but feel that they need to raise an issue because it's better to try and deal with it quickly and swiftly. We still continue to deal with those. We have created another system that enables us to track them, because as you can imagine, we serve nearly 4,000 people day in, day out. That's the enormity of role that we have in adult social care. But also we deal with other complaints and other issues across Haringey in its entirety, and sometimes from people who do not receive care and support from us directly. So there is a lot of work to do, and we are working in DMT and redesigning it and ensuring it's more effectively. But I still would encourage people where possible to contact us so that we can support and find a solution to their issues without going through the formal process. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. I was also going to add that you're doing a piece of work on what you call the front door, aren't you, and how people come in. And I think that should help people's their relationship with us and how they feel when they're communicating, because it should be smoother, clearer, and there should be a response, and a bit of automation in there can help that as well. So that's a piece of work that's ongoing. Co-production and co-design. Yeah, I mean, I think they're fair remarks. And I don't know, I might bring Beverly in a minute, but I think we in our area had done quite a bit of co-production and learnt a little. But I think that's still a learning journey, and it's still a huge learning journey, I think, for the council. You'll have heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. I hope it's the same definition as everybody else's. But co-production isn't, I turn up with a list, I give you a long list of things I want, and when you don't give them to me, I say, well, that wasn't good co-production. Co-production is we sit round the table with some problems and realities, and some of those problems are quite difficult. Some of the realities might be about finance due, and we work out something together that meets all those. And you're right, that's not always that's not always possible, because we have certain legal duties, we have certain responsibilities. So that means that, and some things are governed by the law. I know in parking there are all sorts of rules about what you call a consultation and X, Y, Z. So I think we're still learning, and you're right. Maybe perhaps sometimes it's not always clear to residents what's this level of engagement. Or it may not be what residents want. They want a different form of engagement for a particular, I don't know, going on. But having said all that, we have done so much. I mean, I think the wood green engagement, I know it's not our portfolio, but it's a really good example of taking some of the principles and some of the ideas of co-production, some of which have been used in other areas, and delivering something where we've engaged with a large number of people, range of age groups, on what the future of their bit of the borough is. So I think we're beginning to do that and learn. We have to keep working on making sure that everybody's at this around the table and is really clear on what that means. And in that time, we'll all get things wrong, both us as politicians, the council, and even the community. There'll be good and bad and difficult moments, I think. But the important thing is how we can work those through together. But I think it will be some time before we say, okay, well, I don't think a project will ever be done, because it's always an ongoing piece of work. But I think it'll be some time before we feel we're really there as much as we'd like to be. And obviously, some parts of the council have more experience than others, and sometimes some projects are harder than others to work through. So I don't know if that's really the answer that you wanted, but it's an honest one. I don't know if nobody's got any observations on our portfolio and co-production.
Thanks, Councillor Desnes, and thanks for the question. I think it's a really significant one. Just to agree with everything Councillor Desnes has said, and really just to make the point that we can't assume that because we go to residents and say we want to co-produce with you, that residents understand what we're talking about, how residents understand that they need to be empowered to actually, that we have to give up some of that power in those conversations. And that's not something that just happens overnight. I think there are some excellent examples where that's happened in our services, but I think there's an opportunity with the shift to localities-based sort of working, because having the opportunity to be alongside people within communities, there's the opportunity not to just listen to what I call the usual voices. They're always the very articulate voices that will come to a meeting that you might arrange. But actually being present in the community, I think, enables that diversity of voices. And we can't forget that we have to work in partnership with communities that know those voices the best. We're not often best placed to know the diversity of our communities. The more we can build relationships with those diverse communities, their leaders within those communities, and recognize that they need to be supported to actually, participate in what we are calling co-production or co-design, I think then our journey will begin. I think we're still testing and we're still learning, and we are very, very, very committed to that way of working. But it is by no means done. I think there is just something around having the opportunity to hear different voices, to be in the place where people are, where we can actually get that diversity. And for us to recognize as officers, we actually have to give up some of the power in that relationship imbalance that we have with our residents in our communities.
Thanks. Oh, you can't shut me up now, I'm afraid. I was thinking about Sean asked earlier about that vision, and I think the issue of co-production speaks to that vision of being relational, and I think the cuts that we went through that were due to government cutting money, but fundamentally cut our relationship with residents, broke down some of that relational space with residents. And so we're building that and being relational in our work and in how we work with service users, how we work with residents. I think that's fundamental, but that takes time and it takes trust. And I think I'd emphasise what Beverly says, it takes giving of power and creating of a safe space to do it. And that's no mean feat, I think.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to close down this part of the session now because we have run a little bit over time. Apologies, but it was very important again to hear from the cabinet member and officers tonight and just ask those questions that I know have probably come from residents as well as from ourselves. So I thank you to the cabinet member, to all the officers on the call for your time this evening. Thank you very much. And there's an action in there for Will, but other than that, I think just thank you, and you're free to go. But we have still got the work programme to do, so I'm afraid you need to stay a little bit longer. So we're going to keep Ali. Yes, I've just said goodbye.
Good night. Good night.
Thanks, bye.
Ali, you're staying on with us, so not everyone who's online is heading off. And we're just going to very quickly turn on agenda item 10 to our work programme. We've got the project discharge from hospitals. We do need to get those last sessions organised. So Dominic, have we got any dates yet? The last couple of sessions in the diary?
We don't, I'm afraid. I think we need to have a conversation this week just about sort out exactly what the content of those last sessions would be. We did have some suggestions for witnesses. We had a session that I think was quite well attended a few weeks ago with the North Mid discharge team, which was very good. So everything's written up, so I'll send everyone a comprehensive update this week with all of the minutes of all the sessions that we've done. But yeah, as Councillor Connor says, we're a bit behind on this one, so we do need to get the last 2 or 3 sessions wrapped up as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you. And I was going to suggest that we meet for a coffee. Thank you, Beverly. We meet for a coffee. Those of us who, well, you don't have, you can have tea. To discuss the digitalisation and communications with residents, because that was going to be the next project. Now, obviously, that was discussed last year, so I just want to have this opportunity informally to meet with you and just to see if this is an area that we're still interested in pursuing. I think there's a lot about communication at the moment going on in the council, so I think this might be quite an opportune moment, as it was mentioned last year, but obviously we do need to have this conversation as a panel. So I'm going to ask Dominic again to put around another set of dates. So you're going to have lots of dates coming around. If you could just respond to those as soon as possible, and we'll just pick a date and time that the majority of people can attend to discuss this. I've got Sean and then Ty, sorry.
Okay, thanks. In relation to the discharge from hospital, I think there were a couple of things we were going to do in relation to dementia, but also people with no course to public funds who are trapped in a position where they're fit to leave hospital, but they don't have anywhere to go. And I've spoken to a few people, and also at the health inclusion, that we spoke to some people from Mulberry Junction, who they had a hospital discharge move-on coordinator. I think that position's been empty for the last 3 months, but they're going to they're recruiting for someone at the moment, and they should be in post the end of September. And we spoke to somebody from Mulberry Junction, but I also spoke to Jane Wilson, who was, well, she's both a senior urgent care coordinator, but she's also head of systems coordinator for out of hospital care I think she's at quite a high level, but she said that she would be very happy to come to answer questions in relation to hospital discharge, not just in relation to people with no recourse to public funds, but other people who may have there's difficulty discharging them because they don't have anywhere to go. So her name is Jane Wilson. I can NHS. Yeah. She works for the Integrated Care Board.
Oh, she's an ICB.
Yeah, yes.
Couldn't understand who she was.
Okay. I can send you some contact details for her. No.
Excellent. Very useful, and always great to have more people that we can have that final conversation with, because I think after these last two sessions, we have a list of people that we wanted to speak to that we've been building up over the course of this project. So I think these last two sessions were really helpful just to sort of have that final evidence, but also come to some conclude recommendations that obviously we need to make as the panel. Ty?
Just a quick point. I think the visit to the hospital, I assume that's going to be on a working day and time rather than in the evening or the weekend. That is going to make it quite challenging for some of us who are working full time. So, so I think, I mean, it just may be that some of the panel members won't be able to make it unless you make an exception to say, like, for example, I have Monday afternoon for council business, and whether I could, if everyone didn't mind, that would, potentially could be the timing that I could give up to attend. So it's just an ask, but it may be that if that's too much of an ask, then I won't be able to join. And then the same with the cafe. I mean, if you want to meet, then
can make it on a Saturday.
Yeah,
if you're
weekend would
better half, so happy to give you up on a.
what so just an ask, really. Yeah.
It is really important, and I know we're all really busy, and we do try to have some protected time for family and friends and everybody else that goes on. So we try not to do weekends if possible, but obviously if it's impossible for us to meet otherwise, I'll put in a 9 a.m. No. Anyway, I'm seeing some smiles, some not. So we'll put around some dates, and we'll definitely try to be as accommodated as we possibly can and get as many people along to the sessions as we can, because that's very important. But as I said, the next panel work is really important. We start to think about that and actually plan it, put the terms of reference in, and then we can put those dates already in whilst we're finishing this one off. The work programme you'll see on your sheet on page 65. So in November, you've got the Haringey Safeguarding Board. We've got the CQC overview with CQC colleagues invited to the meeting. And we've got the Adult Social Care Commissioning Co-Production Scrutiny Review, which was mainly co-production, to be honest, scrutiny review. So that'll be really interesting to see how far we've got with that whole process of co-production. We've had a little flavour of it tonight, but it'd be really interesting to see how our recommendations as a panel have sort of fed into what's going on and what else is going to be done. Then we've got the budget, and then we've got aids and adaptations and cabinet member questions. There is a space left deliberately, excuse me, on the 22nd of February, because we obviously want to be flexible to put in an urgent item if it comes to us. We've already got some different ones coming in from this evening, but actually it's just working out what we can do. And then it's not on here, but we've actually got the joint meeting that we have with the children's panel. There is a date for that. I've seen it. I'm not sure why it's not on our work programme. Can we add that to the list? I'm not sure.
It's usually February, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the, I need to look at it.
Yeah, I think it's usually February, but I think we need to put that in. It's around the transition process and different areas that we specifically concentrate in on. So that's it, unless anyone's got questions on the work programme. No, Okay, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming along, asking all the questions, and thank you for all your input tonight. Thank you.